90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast, is made possible by listeners just like you. If you want to help us out, you can go to 90milesfromneedles.com/donate or text NEEDLES to 53555.
Think the deserts are barren wastelands? Think again. It's time for 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast.
This is a story of copper, a metal valued by mankind since the Bronze Age, and of universal importance in this modern age of electricity. This story describes the great modern open pit. It shows the various steps to which the ore is subjected until the copper emerges, ready for fabrication into thousands of useful forms. At the warning signal, everyone must leave the blasting area. After the area has been cleared, an electric blasting cap is attached to the end of the main blasting line. And finally, the wires from the cap are connected to a hand blasting machine. And then, fire. There goes 250,000 tons of broken ore.
And then there was that day, I think it was about 7 years ago, where I found a dozen square miles of missing desert valley between the Mineral and Dripping Springs mountain ranges and the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. The air was full of black butterflies. My dog Hart and I went on a road trip through Arizona without much of an itinerary plan, figuring that we would weave and dodge, try to avoid the worst of a hurricane that was, at that moment, petering out over the Arizona desert. We headed south from Superior. 10% grade next 7 miles, warned the yellow signs. And it was as fine a vista of saguaro and cholla as I have ever seen. The ocotillos had leafed out in the wake of the storm. And I wondered, why, in all my decades of traveling the desert, had I never taken the turnoff from Superior toward Winkleman, and then there was a sharp curve in the road around an elbow of mountain, and the valley beyond was just gone. Not paved, not plowed, not built upon, not dumped upon, gone, excised. A smooth-faced void where an entire Sonoran Desert Valley once lived, where canyon wrens once sang, wolves hunted, jaguars slept. If space aliens arrived with an orbital death ray and erased a valley in just this fashion, the nations of the world would go to war. Sadly for the land and its lovers, the thing that had annihilated this valley was a corporation with a century-old logo. The Ray Mine, between the Dripping Springs and Mineral Mountains north of Kearney, is a 250,000-ton per day copper operation. ASARCO, its owner, is responsible for 20 Superfund sites scattered across the country like windblown plastic bags. ASARCO expects to keep pulling copper from Ray until 2044. It boasts on its website about the $13 million in annual property taxes it pays, the 1,400 plus people it employs, and in exchange, we receive more copper on the world market. And this, 13 square miles of absence. A valley deleted. How many thousands of saguaros once lived here? How many chollas and rattlesnakes, palo verdes, ironwoods, petroglyphs, pot drops? All of it vaporized beneath the slow explosion of excavation. But jobs. Jobs! I try to look away. I try to let my mind wander to the Painted Desert, where 3 days before rain had shown the bentonite how to move again, where trickles of water reshaped badlands in real time. I try to recall the prairie falcon sitting atop an interpretive sign overlooking the Painted Desert, casting a side eye at the dog's approach. Distracting myself didn't work. The Ray Mine isn't the largest open-pit copper mine in the state of Arizona. That distinction belongs to the Morenci Mine. It's also not the first one I'd seen. I don't remember which one I saw first, but certainly had spent a lot of time looking into the mouth of the new Cornelia open pit mine in Ajo, and had certainly seen the impressive tailings piles around Miami and Globe. But the Ray mine was about as stark and unexpected as I had ever seen. And the state of Arizona, or at least the powers that be in the state level in the state of Arizona, bears that scar with pride, one would think. Astute listeners will know that there have been a couple of very controversial copper mines proposed in eastern Arizona and southern Arizona. One, the Resolution Copper Mine in Oak Flat, sacred land to the Apache, we will cover in a future episode. But on this episode, we're going to talk about Copper World in the Santa Rita Mountains, just south of Tucson. We're joined by John Dougherty, who is executive director of the Save the Scenic Santa Ritas Association, which since the mid-90s has been opposing copper mines throughout southeastern Arizona, but especially in the Santa Rita Mountains. And we're very grateful to John for having pulled over to the side of the road and sat in his car for about an hour talking to us. I think you're going to like that interview. Just keep in mind that he's sitting in his car. There is a little bit of audio evidence of that. But in the meantime, before we get started, I want to thank Kathleen Pollitt for making a new recurring donation to the Desert Advocacy Media Network, which funds this podcast. Thank you, Kathleen. If you want to become one of those new people and either get your name mentioned or not, if you'd prefer not, just let us know. You can go to 90milesfromneedles.com/donate and pick an amount and a frequency of donation that works for you, and you will help us keep going. But now, let's get to our interview with John Dougherty of the Save the Scenic Santa Ritas Association to talk about Copper World, aka the Rosemont Mine, in the Santa Rita Mountains just south of Tucson. We are chatting with John Dougherty, who's executive director of Save the Scenic Santa Ritas Association. Save the Scenic Santa Ritas has been working to oppose a series of copper mines in the Santa Rita Mountains near Green Valley, Sahuarita, Corona del Tucson, Sonoita, places that a lot of our listeners mainly know from going birding, a beautiful area around there. And Save the Scenic Santa Ritas has been working to oppose those mines, which would essentially destroy the character of the area. John Dougherty, I'm just really grateful that you took some time to talk with us today. Welcome to 90 Miles from Needles.
Well, thank you very much. We're delighted to be here. Save the Scenic Santa Ritas has been working to oppose open pit copper mining in the Santa Rita Mountains since 1996. And there's been various iterations over that time. But we're clearly now facing the gravest threat, a massive open pit mine or a series of pit mines being developed in these mountains. These mountains are critical. They are a major wildlife corridor. We've had jaguars and ocelots appear in these mountains, and they also provide a lot of renewable water to Davidson Canyon and Cienega Creek, both of which are classified as outstanding Arizona waters that are prohibited by law from degradation. And this is a very important issue that I'll elaborate on later in the show. These water courses also provide renewable water to the city of Tucson. The mine project would destroy the northern half of the Santa Rita Mountains, and it would also create a major open pit on the eastern flank of the mountains that ultimately could be 1.5 miles wide, a half-mile deep, and that will pierce the groundwater table. It will draw in groundwater in this region forever, and it will evaporate out at a rate of more than 120 million gallons a year. And so the damage doesn't just stop when the mining stops. The damage continues on forever. and it will continue to pull in the groundwater and evaporate it out. I call it just a massive groundwater evaporation engine. That's what they're going to leave us behind. That's what they don't ever want to talk about. And unfortunately, there's no state or federal regulation to prohibit this incredible squandering of water in the desert Southwest, in the Sonoran Desert. This is what deregulation means. And even during a period when we had stronger environmental laws, which are being decimated by the minute, we didn't have anything to stop this. So that tells you, how critical this situation is. If this mine goes in and that pit goes in, it'll pull in groundwater from Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area, one of the most prized, beautiful areas in the Southwest that is immediately east of the Santa Rita Mountains. And it'll probably dry up that Ciénega Creek, which would be a tragic loss to biodiversity, birding, endangered species, wildlife corridors, and everything. So this is a tremendous threat to southern Arizona. And it's rather unbelievable, but the copper that they're going to pull out of there isn't staying in the United States. The company has launched a massive propaganda disinformation campaign to make it sound like this copper is going to be used in the United States. The company admits that at least for the first 4 years, it's all going to be exported. The company just entered into a joint venture partner with Mitsubishi to allow Mitsubishi to take at least 30% of the copper produced here and export it over to Japan. And the technology that they're talking about trying to use on site to produce on site copper from a sulfide ore body without using a smelter is untested at scale. And the company has committed no money to actually doing it. Yet their whole propaganda campaign in the community is about Arizona copper for American use. It's all baloney. It's all deception, but it's just par for the course with this company. Most of what they say you have to verify, and a lot of what you try to verify turns out to be untrue.
So this sounds like mining as usual, though obviously the regulations are being weakened, rolled back, and rewritten. I know that some of our listeners who may have been paying attention to environmental issues in that part of the state probably would recognize this as the Rosemont Mine. Is this essentially the same project, or does it just happen to be more or less in the same place?
Well, that's a great question. And part of the deception of this operation is they changed the Rosemont Mine name to Copper World as a rebranding effort. And that's caused a lot of confusion with the public about is Copper World related to Rosemont. Yes, they are the same project, but expanded. A few years ago, a federal court judge in Tucson ruled that the planned Rosemont mine on the east side of the Santa Ritas could not dump its tailings and waste rock on federal land. This has turned out to be known as the Rosemont decision, and it's probably one of the most significant federal court decisions impacting mining on federal lands in the last 50 years. So Hudbay was no longer able to develop the Rosemont mine on the east side with all the tailings going on the east side. So they jumped over to the west side of the mountain, bought up a lot of private land using a company with a name that was not associated with the mining operation. They bought thousands of acres. And now they're planning to develop a series of open pit mines under the banner of Copper World. And they will start this on the west side of the mountain initially. But within a couple years, they will start to develop the Rosemont pit on the east side. And so the plan is the west side pits are very shallow in comparison to Rosemont, and frankly would never have been developed unless the Rosemont pit was going to be part of the project. And they will have the mining completed on the west side within the first 4 to 5 years of the project. They will dump a lot of tailings and waste rock on the west side of the mountain, including stuff coming out of the Rosemont pit for the first 15 to 20 years. The long-range plan in phase 2 is to move on to additional federal land on the east side of the mountain to expand the Rosemont pit up to 1.5 miles wide, half-mile deep, and most likely dump waste rock and mining tailings on the east side of the mountain as well. Basically, it's going to be a destruction zone from the west side of the mountain, up the slope, across the top of the mountain, down the east side of the mountain, and on the eastern slope as well. Tailings, waste rock, open pits, you name it. They will destroy the northern half of the Santa Rita Mountains.
And what kind of guarantees have they made about restoration? Not that you can really restore an open pit of a size like they're talking about, but I mean, what kind of agreements do they have in place to try and mitigate the damage once they're done?
The first phase of this project is being done on state land, and all they needed from the state of Arizona is something called a mine reclamation plan, minimal restoration. I mean, the biggest damage is going to be the open pit. They refuse to backfill the pit. They're not required to backfill the pit. And so the open pit is going to be absolutely devastating, as I explained earlier, because it'll become a groundwater evaporation engine.
Right.
And it will leach in toxic minerals from the side of the pit, probably very dangerous for migratory birds. We know there's going to be high selenium in it and probably other metals as well. You know, they say they're going to put some soil over the tailings and try to get stuff to grow on it. And we have a lot of mining down here in southern Arizona, and the tailings, in some cases you'll see, you know, some scattered trees growing them, mesquites and things like that. But by and large, after decades and decades, these things remain a rather hazardous waste area because the tailings dust and high winds will blow, and they blow all over the place, and they contain traces of heavy metals and are not something you want to live next to or have your children go to school that's downwind from these things. But that's what they plan to do here. The state of Arizona has, we're a copper state. We produce 70% of the copper in the United States. The state government has always been very much basically captured by the copper industry. And so it's a tough road to try to stop this thing. But we are, in fact, very lucky that Pima County, where this mine is going to be constructed, has passed its fourth resolution since 2007 opposing this mine. They're strongly opposed to it. Most of the political leaders in the city of Tucson are opposed to it. The major indigenous nations here, the Tohono and the Pasquayaqui, they're opposed to it. And we have a very strong environmental ethic in southern Arizona with tens of thousands of voters and citizens who are strongly opposed to that because we know how critical water is in the Sonoran Desert. And we know it doesn't take much to dry up a creek. You drop the groundwater table a couple feet, that's the end of the creek. And that's probably what could happen to Cienega Creek.
So Save the Scenic Santa Ritas Association has a couple of procedural efforts to slow this thing down in the works that you've been doing. Can you tell us a little about those?
Well, we've been filing litigation consistently for years on this project. We were a plaintiff in the federal lawsuit I addressed earlier that stopped the development of the Rosemont Mine for a few years on the east side of the mountain, and the Rosemont decision. And because of that court ruling, Congress is responding with something called the Mining Clarity Regulatory Act. That bill's going through Congress now, and that legislation would open up mining throughout the West on public lands and basically give mining companies carte blanche to build pipelines, roads, power lines without any kind of environmental review, with hardly any kind of restrictions whatsoever. It's just would be open season. And folks who've lived out west and have been around mining sites know the disaster that results from these things when there is no regulation. There's more than 50,000 abandoned open mining sites in the West, and many of them are leaching out high levels of contaminated water. It's a massive problem. And instead of addressing this and trying to narrow it down, Congress is doubling down on the deregulatory philosophy. Now, in the state, we have a couple pending lawsuits. We have challenged the air quality permit that the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality issued. We believe that permit is way too lax for the amount of air pollution that's going to be created by this mine site. And, they don't include the dust and the material that can blow from these tailing dumps that can stretch on for hundreds and hundreds of acres. Those are exempt largely from state regulations as far as air quality. And so the biggest waste product from the mines, they basically, say, well, we're not going to deal with that. But we're challenging them, and we're going through the process there. Another key issue here that I'll dial back for a minute and try to provide a description here.
Hmm.
On the east side of the Santa Rita Mountains, you have Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area, 45,000 acres. It's an incredible grassland with a series of very shallow water courses that run from south to north that feed into Cienega Creek, and Cienega Creek is a major contributor to the surface water supplies for the city of Tucson. That's on the east side. On the west side of the mountain is something called the Santa Rita Experimental Range. This hasn't gotten much publicity, but the Santa Rita Experimental Range is a 52,000 acre space that was created by the federal government in 1902 to begin to study how we can better manage grazing in arid lands. Because by the late 1800s, ranching had destroyed a lot of the grasslands in the West and was causing a lot of problems. Well, back then, the federal government actually took a proactive step and said, well, wait a minute, we got to figure out what's going on here. The Santa Rita Experimental Range was owned by the federal government until the late 80s when it was traded to the state of Arizona as compensation for land taken to build the Central Arizona Project Canal. Since then, the Santa Rita Experimental Range has been managed by the University of Arizona and is owned by the Arizona State Land Department. This is a very, very incredible space because it's 52,000 acres of open space. And, in an area such as this, where we're seeing a lot of urbanization coming down I-19 and, starting to pinch into the range, if you take all together the Santa Rita Experimental Range, 52,000 acres, the Santa Rita Mountains, which is a tremendously important wildlife corridor for large mammals, including jaguars and ocelots, and the eastern side with the Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area, all three of these things should be combined into a national conservation area or a national monument of that caliber. It should have been a national park years ago, but I don't think that'll ever happen. I mean, in my wildest dreams, I hope, but that's the magnitude of the area and the importance of the resource. And HUD Bay Minerals wants to go right into the middle of this, right into the heart of the Santa Rita Mountains and destroy it for, 5 billion pounds of copper that's going to be exported overseas and provide virtually no economic benefit to this community beyond a few jobs.
I am always surprised by the number of people, even committed environmental activists, who don't understand what the General Mining Act of 1872 does, what kinds of privileges it grants to mining companies, and how little the U.S. gets back in return for granting these permits to take natural resources out of the ground. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just precisely how much the communities in the Southwest are going to see from this mine.
Well, I mean, the General Mining Act of 1872 does not require mining companies who are doing hard rock mining, such as extracting copper, to pay any royalties to the United States Treasury. And so, unlike oil and gas that's developed on public lands where there's a royalty, 15% approximately, there's no royalty here. And so these guys have obtained rights to this copper ore without having to pledge any money whatsoever to the United States Treasury. And it's the taxpayers of the United States who end up bearing the cost of what's left behind on these mines, from the air pollution, the groundwater contamination, the groundwater depletion, the surface water contamination. Just the damage is shoved off onto the taxpayers. As a company, you couldn't ask for more. You get the water resources for free. You can pollute the air for free. You can leave the damage for free. But you keep all the profits generated from the resource that's extracted from federal land. It's one of the most outrageous arrangements you can think of. It was done in 1872 to encourage development of the West. I mean, that was the purpose of it, was to get people to come out here, do some prospecting, pick and shovel and mule and chip away at the hillsides and get a little copper out of here, a little gold, a little silver. And it did spur development. There's no question. It was an integral part of the colonization of the Western United States, was the General Mining Act of 1872. But, the technology that we're using today is unbelievably different from the technology that was applied in 1872.
Yep.
The amount of copper that's in the ground here is less than 0.5%, 0.5 of 1% copper. 99.5% of what's going to be extracted from this mine is waste. And that's what is being done across the board now with these modern open pit copper mines. They're going after very low grade copper, but because of the technology that we have, we can destroy these areas, extract massive amounts of ore, grind them up for a little bit of copper, and still make a profit. Well, they can make a profit for a couple reasons. One, they don't have to pay any royalty.
Mhm.
Two, they can pump the groundwater here and not pay any fee to the state of Arizona for depleting the groundwater. And three, they get the land for next to nothing. So, I mean, the economics are really in their favor. And then they wrap this all up with glossy websites and fancy billboards and propaganda saying, you know, this is all going to be great. We're regulated to the highest standards. We're responsible, blah, blah, blah. It's all BS. Their goal is simple. Dig the biggest hole as you can, grind up as much rock as you can, extract as much critical or valuable minerals as you can, and move on. And that's what's going to happen here. But we've got a couple things that we're going after here that we believe can slow them down. There was another lawsuit I got the verdict on there that I wanted to go back to the Santa Rita Experimental Range.
Mhm.
The state of Arizona snuck through, in violation of the open meetings law, by the way, which we sued and won on, a provision to allow HUD Bay to build a tailings pipeline from their production area to their waste dumps, which are non-contiguous. They had two choices. They could run the pipeline through BLM land or run it through the Santa Rita Experimental Range. They didn't want to do the BLM land because up until recently, the National Environmental Policy Act would have required some extensive review. They wanted to bypass that. And so they filed for a right-of-way across the range and did not disclose that it was going to be used to transport mine tailings. The state of Arizona's land department did not disclose that to the public prior to a public meeting. We caught them on it, we sued, and we won. And actually recouped our attorney fees, which were substantial when you try to do these type of things. Now we have filed a subsequent suit saying, hey, that pipeline's going across the Santa Rita Experimental Range, and by state statute, that's required to be used for ecological and rangeland research. The range was not created, nor intended, nor should be used as an industrial corridor. And so we're challenging whether they can put that tailings pipeline, which is critical to their operation, across the range. That case is pending in Maricopa County Superior Court, and we expect to hear a ruling anytime here, later this month. It could happen anytime.
Moving tailings with a pipeline implies the use of a lot of groundwater.
Yes, and let's talk about groundwater. They plan to drill at least 4 high production wells just to the east of the Santa Cruz River, just east of Sarita, and north of Green Valley. These wells would have the ability to pump initially up to 6,000 acre feet of water a year. However, in Arizona, there is no law that prevents mining companies from amending their permits to the Arizona Department of Water Resources to increase the amount of groundwater that they will pump. Their own studies indicate they're going to pump at least 9,000 acre feet of water a year. That would be about 3 billion gallons of water from the groundwater table in this area, which already is declining, is already in stress from existing mines and agriculture and rapid development. And so we're going to see a collision here. If this goes forward, the groundwater table depletion is going to greatly increase, and the water bills for the people living in this area are going to go up because HUD Bay is going to pull this amount of groundwater out of the ground, and it's going to cause the aquifer to decline. Now, HUD Bay has been saying for years that they were going to bring in Central Arizona project water and bring that to the community and replenish the groundwater that they use. In fact, on their website, they say they're going to replenish and recycle all the water they're going to use. I ran the numbers. It's beyond deception. The amount of water that they've been able to bring down here that could actually replenish the groundwater table compared to the amount of water that they're going to use is less than 1%. There's no way they can replenish the groundwater they're going to pump out of here. Furthermore, the Central Arizona Project Canal is a canal that brings in water from the Colorado River across the desert to Phoenix, down to Tucson, and terminates just north of Sarita. Well, there's a major problem, as we all know. The Colorado River is under tremendous stress,
Yep.
and the amount of water that's going to be able to be diverted to new users is going to be de minimis. It's going to really put a big constraint on folks who are relying on the Colorado River through the CAP. So HUD-based plan to replenish the groundwater here hinges on water coming from the Colorado River that doesn't exist. That's another part of the deception that they use to confuse the public. They try to tell the public, well, we're going to replace all the water we're going to use. Wrong. We're under the most stringent environmental standards. We're going to build a responsible mine. Wrong. They're just going to build a regular old open pit copper mine. And it's just kind of a major part of our mission is dissembling the falsehoods that these guys put out and then trying to explain to the public, here's what's really going to happen.
Yeah, I saw in some of the stuff that HUD-Bay put out that they were pledging to put 105% of the water that they used into the ground. And this question that immediately came up for me is, from where? There's just so many different projects. I mean, we have gold mines being proposed in the very western edge of the Mojave in California, where they're talking about bringing water in. And where is that coming from? It's like they never seem to mention that part.
No, and it's just a flat out lie. You just look at their own numbers. The CAP allocation that they do have right now, they're in the middle, I think it's the fifth year of a 10-year allocation of about 1,100 acre feet a year. The amount of water that they're going to pump out is 9,000 acre feet a year.
Yep.
I mean, you don't have to really be a high-end mathematician to figure out that 1,100 is not going to replenish 9,000. And that 1,100's been cut down to 870. And next year they're getting ready. We're coming to the crisis on the Colorado River. The reallocation's coming. I'd be surprised if they even maintain 860 acre feet. Now, they have stored a total of 45,000 acre feet, but virtually all of that is at a replenishment center in Marana, 45 miles north of this area. That groundwater is not going to do this area any good at all. But they don't really explain that either to the public. But the groundwater in this immediate area is not being replenished. The 45,000 that they have replenished is 45 miles north. Furthermore, that replenishment all came during 2007, 8, and 9 when there was surplus CAP water, and it was done by a previous owner of the mine. It wasn't done by HUD-Bay. HUD-Bay's also told the community down here, we're working with a local water company, community water company, to build a pipeline that would bring water from the terminus of the CAP about 9 miles down, and we're going to build replenishment ponds here, and this is going to be where we're going to actually be able to recharge the water. But again, they only have an allocation of 1,100 acre feet. They're pumping out 9,000. That doesn't work. Secondly, the pipeline's gone nowhere, 20% complete. And third, I really don't think HUD-Bay is going to spend a dime on this because they know that there's no CAP water to be had anyway. That's speculation on my part, but I think it's pretty grounded speculation. And the reason why they haven't finished this project, it's called Project Renews, it's kind of obvious. I mean, they're going, why should we spend $20 million, $30 million on this project when we don't even know how much water we're going to have?
So if left to its own devices with no mines and no diversions and such, the groundwater and then the surface water in this area would eventually flow into the Santa Cruz River. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the Santa Cruz River on the west side would be the beneficiary of any water that comes off the mountain. And then on the east side, it would be Las Ciénegas Natural Conservation Area with Cienega Creek and Davidson Canyon. They would be the beneficiaries of the water. The groundwater that they're pumping out is old water. It's not going to come back, and it's just going to continue to lower the groundwater table. We already have subsidence ongoing in Sarita and Green Valley area, and that's just going to get worse. So the bottom line is we don't have the water to do these massive mining projects that built Arizona in the early 20th century. We just don't have the water anymore.
Right.
And we have to come to grips with that. And it's not like you can replace it. I mean, they come up with some harebrained schemes of do desalination down in the Sea of Cortez and, use that for an exchange for groundwater or water that the United States owes Mexico every year on an international treaty. There's all sorts of pie in the sky plans to try to come up with more water. Arizona has got one of the most Byzantine, complicated groundwater management systems you can imagine. And a lot of it's paper water. Towns and cities will say, well, we've got all this water banked. What do you mean you have it banked? It's a lot of it is just paper water. It's not real water. So we're coming to a crisis here. The surface water doesn't exist as it used to. The groundwater is being depleted at an incredible rate. And now you have these big, massive copper mines that are coming in that want to use even more water. This water here is a major problem at Copper World, but up in the Phoenix area, the Resolution mine would pump even more. So that whole East Valley of Phoenix is going to be under tremendous stress if the Resolution mine goes in. But down here, yeah, there's no way to replenish what they're going to use, and it's going to have a permanent, long-term negative impact on this community. The economics of these things are very difficult to pencil out because here's the game they play. The mine company comes in and says, we're going to create X number of jobs, and those jobs generate X amount of taxes, and we're going to pay this amount of property taxes, and this is going to generate X amount of downstream secondary jobs, and we have this massive economic engine, and this is going to be incredibly beneficial to your economy. Okay, in the short term, you are going to get, in this case, maybe 400 permanent jobs, but the devastation to the landscape and the depletion of the groundwater is going to permanently damage future economic development that could be done more sustainably. Houses use far less water, and you can capture and recycle water that is used in residences. You can't recycle and recapture water that's used in these mining projects. And then the other thing that people need to understand is that copper is an element that is all over the world. There's not a shortage of copper. There's a shortage of copper mines right now, but there are more and more coming on. And if the price of copper goes up, so what? If the price of copper goes up, it brings about change. It brings about alternative products. It forces industry to look at new and more efficient ways to build products. The mining industry makes it sound like that society and our economy as we move forward would be severely hampered and constrained unless we build every copper mine that's being proposed. That's not true. The economies are very complex, and price rises and increases in the cost of copper send a signal to the marketplace to develop alternatives. And that's what happens. That's how a free market works. I think it's okay if the price of copper goes up. So what? But it would not impact the overall cost of most products, maybe just, minimally as they get incorporated into it. So it's very important not to buy off on this baloney that if we don't have we're going to run out of copper. If we don't develop this mine, we're not going to be able to have cell phones and cars and, electric cars and things like that. That's not true. It's a worldwide copper market. Copper comes from many, many different sources. And in fact, the United States has, because of concerns over severe pollution caused by copper smelters, which Arizona was surrounded by, and we had some of the dirtiest air in the country because of copper smelting. Most of the copper smelters in the United States have closed. There's only 2 copper smelters that are functioning. One is in Miami, Arizona, operated by Freeport-McMoRan, which is the largest copper mining company in the United States. And the second is in Salt Lake City area, operated by Kennecott, which is owned by Rio Tinto, which is a British-based company. That's it. There's 2 smelters. Over the last 10 years, 30% of all the copper that's produced in the United States is exported, okay? And no one wants to build a smelter because the Chinese have flooded the market with smelters. They can produce a smelter for 500% less than we can do in the West and operate them for half the cost. There's no way that the United States is going to build a new copper smelter unless it's a nationalized industry and that we would have to subsidize at a huge cost. The most economical and profitable way to process copper is to export it, and the most likely destination is to China. There's some other areas of the world that operate smelters, but like I said earlier in our preliminary conversation, this copper is going overseas. All this copper from Copper World is going overseas, and almost virtually certain it's going to end up in China. And that's an area of misinformation that the mining company is pumping out. It's telling people that this is Arizona copper for American consumers. That's not true. The company admits in its financial filings that the first 4 or 5 years will all be exported. It's far cheaper for Hudbay just to continue exporting versus having to spend $500 million or more on an untested technology at this scale. So I anticipate this copper, if this mine gets developed, will continue to go overseas.
This has been a really fascinating conversation, and I'm wondering what listeners can do to help you out in fighting this abomination of a mine proposal.
Well, first, let me say that after all I've said, you might wonder, why are we even trying to stop this thing? Well, we still have some arrows in our quiver. We're very fortunate to have Pima County strongly opposed to this mining project. Pima County has passed 4 resolutions opposing development of open pit mines in the Santa Rita since 2007, including one just last month. We have a strong support of the county. The Native American tribes here, the Toto'atum, the Pasquayaki, and other tribes throughout Arizona are opposed to this because the Santa Rita Mountains are very important sacred indigenous territory to the Toto'atum for sure. I mean, they've got grave burial sites, sacred sites, a lot of important area that's going to be destroyed. So they are strongly opposed to this project. The city of Tucson, most of their political leaders are opposed to this project. The city has fought Hudbay on storing CAP water in replenishment areas. We believe the city of Tucson will continue to be a strong ally in this. With those factors in place, we are working on a project right now with Pima County to put in an ordinance that would reduce the number of trucks that can be driven across dirt roads county-wide. Well, Hudbay's operations are based on the western flank of the Santa Rita Mountains. As I mentioned earlier, on the west flank is the 52,000-acre Santa Rita Experimental Range. And the Santa Rita Experimental Range is a 7.8-mile dirt road that's controlled by Pima County. We're proposing to put in very low number of trucks that could go across a dirt road that we believe could have a significant impact on the ability of Hudbay to operate the mine on the western flank. That ordinance is going to be voted on December 2nd at the Pima County Board of Supervisors.
Sounds like an opportunity for letter writing and showing up at meetings.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be an important ordinance. The county's imposing it on dirt roads throughout the county to reduce the air pollution, which is a real problem. Hudbay needs to run 110 trucks a day across a dirt road through the heart of the Santa Rita Experimental Range. That's going to kick up a tremendous amount of dust into the air, and that's going to cause possible non-attainment area under Federal Clean Air Act rules. So it's a legitimate and real concern that the county has, and we are doing everything we can to support them in reducing truck traffic on dirt roads countywide. That's very important. On the east side of the mountains, Davidson Canyon and Cienega Creek are both classified as outstanding Arizona waters. That means they cannot be subjected to any degradation whatsoever. That tells you how pristine this area is. There's hardly any streams and creeks and river courses in Arizona that have this classification of outstanding Arizona waters. This mine is going to destroy that. And we're going to do everything we can in our power to encourage the state of Arizona to do what it's required to do by law, which is to protect the outstanding Arizona waters in Davidson Canyon and Cienega Creek from any degradation. And that's going to be a major focus of ours moving forward. So we see 2 opportunities here. On the west side, this ordinance to restrict the number of trucks that can go across the dirt road per day. And on the east side, encouraging the state, or if necessary, forcing the state to enforce its own laws to protect Davidson Canyon and Cienega Creek from any degradation, because the runoff coming off the side of the mountain, there's already indications of heavy metals showing up.
Mm-hmm.
HUD-Bay's disputing that vociferously, but we're going to continue doing monitoring with the University of Arizona and the Pima County Flood Control District to see exactly what kind of damage that's already occurring. They've done a tremendous amount of earth disturbance to this area already, even though the board of directors of HUD-Bay Minerals has not decided to build the mine yet. That's because they're trying to finish up a final feasibility study that's required by federal Canadian regulators that must be conducted before a board of directors can approve construction of this mine. Yet they've done a lot of surface stripping. If you fly over or do look at some aerials, it looks like there's pock marks all over the top of the mine. But that's surface damage. They have not started actually digging. And so we're encouraged that there's still an opportunity here. So those are two areas. I mean, we would really encourage people to support the Pima County Board of Supervisors in this ordinance to restrict trucks across dirt roads. And we encourage people to write Governor Hobbs and Attorney General Chris Mays to enforce the outstanding Arizona water laws and step up monitoring of these water courses to detect any kind of degradation that could be coming off the mountain from the ground disturbance that's already occurred. This is going to be a very interesting political situation. Pima County is probably the most liberal county in the state, and it delivered Governor Hobbs the election in 2022. I have to say, Governor Hobbs has not taken a position on this mine at this point, and in fact, her state land department is doing things to facilitate this mine. And we believe that Pima County has taken a lead. Pima County does not want this mine, and we strongly urge Governor Hobbs to stand with Pima County and say, if the local residents there are opposed to this mine, Pima County's opposed to it, the city of Tucson's opposed to it, the Pasquayaki, the Toto'atim, and the citizens of Pima County are opposed to it, I should support them and not stand with HUD-Bay Minerals. This is going to become a critical political issue down the road here. She's up for re-election in 2026, and it's going to be a very tight race. And I think she would be wise to support the folks who have supported her going into that election.
Mm-hmm. And then for folks outside of Arizona as well, I assume that we need to get in touch with our elected officials in D.C. and tell them to scuttle the Mining Clarity Regulatory Act.
Yes, I mean, members of Congress across the country and people who are, listening to this wherever, contact your members of Congress and tell them, do not pass the Mining Clarity Regulatory Act. It would be devastating to the public lands across the West. You are just opening the door for mining companies to do whatever the heck they want to do with no oversight and no regulation. And it would just be a disaster. And it would make the General Mining Act of 1872 look good. That's how bad the Mining Clarity Regulatory Act is. And unfortunately, the senators from Nevada are leading the charge on this. And it's a very short-sighted reaction to the situation that's evolving with the evolution of the green economy. Yes, we need more minerals, but there's areas where you do mining, you have a much better chance of doing it responsibly, truly responsibly, versus just going anywhere the minerals happen to be and blasting away a mountain like the Santa Ritas and destroy a watershed and a critical wildlife corridor and sacred sites and deplete the water and leave us behind forever an open pit that will evaporate 120 million gallons of water a year, on and on. It's just totally irresponsible to do something like this at this time of the water crisis that's enveloping Arizona.
Nevada listeners, sounds like you're being paged. Definitely need to get in touch with your representatives and Senators Rosen and Cortez Masto. Tell them to cut the hell out. John Dougherty, is there anything I have failed to ask you that you were hoping I would ask you?
I think we've covered quite a bit of ground today. We appreciate any support that folks can send us to save the Scenic Santa Ritas. Our website, scenicsanaritas.org. We finance a lot of legal action It's expensive to run these opposition campaigns. We do newspaper ads, flyers, meetings, all sorts of stuff. It's myself and another staff member. We're doing the heavy lifting 9 to 5, and believe me, we're working more than 9 to 5 to stop this mine.
I know how that works. One thing that we have decided is that because our Giving Tuesday returns last year was so disappointing, instead of trying to raise money ourselves, just amplifying other people's Giving Tuesday campaigns. So it sounds like we have a candidate right here.
Well, we'd appreciate any support that you can do, and tell our folks, the people who handle the money, that they should support your organization as well, because we need a network across the board to get the word out, increase understanding of what we're facing here. We're at a critical time. We're at the beginning of a new mining rush. And if you go back and look at what the gold rush and the mining rush did in the mid-1800s, it transformed the West. And now we're 170 years later, and we understand that the devastation that can come from these projects cannot be ignored just on the cross of making more money. Unfortunately, what we're seeing at the federal level is a complete capitulation of any kind of responsibility toward the environment. So what does that mean? It means, like we're seeing here with Pima County and the city of Tucson and the tribes, that the fight is shifting to state and local governments. And it's really important to have good candidates run for the state legislature, for the county supervisor's offices. And this is across the West. These are going to become more and more critical in protecting our natural resources, because the states and counties can take action to protect their land against these mega corporations, such as what we're seeing with Pima County and this ordinance that I hope will pass on December 2nd, and such as Arizona with outstanding Arizona waters. So the fight is now becoming more local. Cities, towns, counties, tribal governments, it's essential to have good candidates run and get elected to those offices.
That sounds like a really good place to close. And John Dougherty from Save the Scenic Santa Ritas, thank you so much for spending some time with us in the remote studio, and best of luck with the next few months.
Well, thank you very much. I was glad to be here, and I wish you the best of luck and happy holidays. And I hope you have some good period of time here with, it was your dog, I understand, was having some serious problems, and I hope that's been resolved. Or if he's passed on, I hope you're doing okay.
No, that hasn't happened quite yet, but I do definitely have that aspect where I think about that more than I think about the fact that she is like sitting next to me asking to be petted. So I just got to take her point of view and everything will be much better.
Yeah, I just lost a dog last year, and I got an old dog who's 14 now and still cranking, and it's a special relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had this one for 11 years now, and she basically hid the fact up until late September that she had a bad case of hip dysplasia. I never would have known. But she started limping, and she's had this her entire life and just has been too tough for her own good.
Well, dogs don't have a self-stop button. They go and go.
That is absolutely correct. And that's it for this episode of 90 Miles from Needles, the Desert Protection Podcast. I've been your host, Chris Clarke. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks especially to John Dougherty of Save the Scenic Santa Ritas Association for taking some time out of his busy day and talking to us. And as well, thank you to Kathleen Pollitt for signing up with us as one of our recurring donors. Again, you can join Kathleen by going to 90milesfromneedles.com/donate if you want to take this slightly threadbare organization and help us keep going into 2026. Because, folks, we're still not sure we're actually going to have a season 5. Things are just that month to month around here. But we do have high hopes, and you can help us make those hopes come true. 90milesfromneedles.com/donate. I also want to thank Joe Jeffrey, our voiceover guy, and Martine Mancha, our podcast artwork creator. We'll be hearing from our Nature Sounds recordist, Fred Bell, in the next episode. Our theme song, Moody Western, is by Brightside Studio. Other music in this episode is by Mojo Productions. And just so you know, we are going to be taking the next week off. So no episode a week from today as we speak. We're going to be using this to do some structural repairs and rearranging things in the studio. Long overdue. We have a studio still set up for 2 people acting as co-hosts, and that has not been the case for a couple of years. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, and here's a thought to close. North of the Ray Mine, the Salt River carves a deep canyon into the Mogollon Rim. Came by once a lifetime ago, at night. For almost 30 years, I had see the Salt River Canyon in daylight on my bucket list of places I needed to go. But that week in 2018, the dog and I descended the looping switchbacks at last. The cooling truck pigging softly behind us. I'd wanted to see the Salt River Canyon in daylight, and here it was. Layers more than 1 billion years old crop out here. Water slices through them with ease. Water in Arizona has erased lava dams 1,000 times larger than anything humans could build, in less time than it takes the Earth to wobble on its axis. Bird-planted seeds will pry apart the mine's engineered walls. Earthquakes will tumble boulders, reroute streams, fill the pit with water, and then silt. Just 3 or 4 million years from now, this vandalism that we call the Ray Mine may register only as a subtle anomaly to whatever species studies rocks in those years. It's a comforting thought, but not very. I prefer my copper where the desert placed it. Diffused into stone, protected under prickly pear and scorpion.
90 Miles from Needles is a production of the Desert Advocacy Media Network.